In yesterday's video, Tamurkhan suffered immense losses when he was fighting an Orcs and Goblins army, and even then suffered a major embarrassment as he laid siege to the wrong city. He thought he was attacking Nuln, and was actually attacking a smaller city to the south. But this chapter, the final chapter of our story, wastes no time catching us up. Tamurkhan now knows exactly where Nuln is, and he's leading all of his forces into it. It jumps right in on the day of battle. And here's the thing, the Horde tries the same tactics again. It sees where Nuln is, they break into those three formations. You have Sail the Faithless leading all of the Marauders and War Mammoths, and it also has some powerful magics as well. And then you have the Chaos Dwarves, the Legion of Asgore, leading all the artillery over the smooth slopes on one side, and Tamurkhan and his Horde going up the main center to take the brunt of combat. Now, the defenders of Nuln have learned from the destruction of their neighbors. They've been watching this whole thing. As I said before, part of the problem with destroying the wrong city is they showed their hands, and now Nuln knows they have this powerful artillery. So they chose to meet the Horde in an open field just in front of the city, outside cannon range. And the idea being, they think they can maneuver better out in the open rather than cooping up inside the city to be destroyed. It also means, this is more important, that they can take those three elements, those three formations, out in piecemeal. They can try to kind of draw them off to the sides, rather than letting the entire army of cannons and magic and swords kind of converge on a singular point like it did in the last city. So Nuln got its troops together, lined them up in a good formation, and basically told everyone, you have one job. Don't let the cannons get in range. The bulk of their force was put into a raised bank just outside the city, and this is thousands of warriors and spearmen and gunners and pistoliers, but also men of faith. What we would know now as the devoted of Sigmars out there, also an array of battle wizards. Remember, this is the technological and religious hub of this area, so it's very important to know that these other elements also exist. The leader of the defenders is named Elspeth von Drecken, and she sits in the city on the back of her Carmine dragon overwatching the entire thing. She has her chosen champion, who will become very relevant later on, who she is using in kind of a devious plot. She gives him a very important amulet, which we'll talk about later on. Now, early in the morning, the lines of battle meet. And this whole section is a lot of epic talk about the battle. It's great to read, not so great to retell, but the main gist is that both sides are gunning for each other's artillery. If you cripple that, then your opposition has a much harder time. They're at a great disadvantage without artillery. And at one point, it seemed like the Chaos forces were guaranteed victory. Sail's forces had done the flanking motion like they were supposed to do, and were kind of mopping up some of the lighter forces. That is until a unit of very veteran handgunners was deployed to meet them. Now, most of Sail's forces were all cavalry, and the veteran status, the skill with which these fighters used their guns, actually incredibly repelled Sail's assault. They shattered Sail the Faithful's forces to the point where he was struck in the head by a stray round, and his war mammoth crashed down on the ground, and they were slayed almost to a man on that flank. Now, what that means in the grandscape is that one of those three formations was neutered. It's still there. There are still random Chaos Marauders on horseback just harassing things and drawing some fire, but for the most part, its real fighting power was crippled at that point. The Chaos Dwarves move to redeploy and seek a better position for their artillery, and while they're moving, they see something strange happening in the Empire lines. Cavalry, pistoliers on horseback, spring up to meet them. And with them, 4 large war machines, which are only described as land ships. You can see them over on Forge World. There's some cool artwork of them. But these really are war machines that are stuffed to the gills with guns. One of those guns is like a large Gatling gun. And in haste, the Chaos Dwarves kind of brace for battle. They didn't have their guns out, weren't ready. They were in the process of moving, which is the exact opportunity that the Empire forces were waiting for. And really they get caught with those two combatants. The horsemen engage the infantry and the gunners of the Chaos Dwarves, while the land ships obliterate a vast majority of their siege weapons. Drazuth, the leader of the Chaos Dwarves, is riding his big flying bull, and he flies out to engage to fight off the land ships. He manages to take out 3 out of the 4, and the Empire troops, those cavalry that were just there, retreat after they kind of broke their morale trying to fight back the Chaos Dwarves line. Now, while the Empire was just repulsed and pushed back, it doesn't really matter because the damage was done. The main bulk of the firepower of the Horde was just neutered. They took out a lot of that artillery. At this point, the third formation is hit. This is the big scrum in the center that Tamurkhan had gotten into, and it was hit by a wall of nearly 1,000 knights. Tamurkhan resolves to show them the power of chaos and dives right in. The power and impact of this charge was devastating, and while it was a lot more devastating to smaller forces like marauders and beastmen, it did very little when it came to the larger elements like plague ogres and trolls and so forth. The book even says it did little more than even the odds. The Horde is just so big that the knights got bogged down. Now, as the day waned, Tamurkhan fell back from the front lines to reassess. The Dolgan flank, led by Sel the Faithless, had collapsed and Sale was MIA, missing in action, and he could see the smoke clouds of the Chaos Dwarves retreating. Basically, they lost their will to fight once their technology was scrapped. And he kind of was doing the math in his head, and through sheer attrition he figured the Empire would probably eventually win. Reinforcements would eventually come, and he has none on his way, so this is not looking good. At least, even if they couldn't win, they would cripple him enough to where he couldn't mount a real attack on the city. And for hours he just raged in his camp because the Throne of Chaos, his goal, seemed so close. But at that moment of utter despair, a very dark voice whispered in his mind, telling him of another possible way. Tamurkhan isolates himself in the battlefield, filled with dead. He just takes a moment to be alone. He takes his axe, and he kills this colossal toad dragon he's been riding around the entire story, his beloved mount, Bublos. And here's the thing that Tamurkhan realizes and why he does that. To conquer the Empire was trivial, vain, and mortal. It was very short-sighted. To truly ascend into demonhood, you need to think bigger than these petty campaigns. Tamurkhan went to the river and poured the blood of his steed in the water and walked in there and just kind of soaked in it for a bit. With this, he was kind of gaining insight and having a personal revelation about the nature of chaos and servanthood to Nurgle. Around him, the water became instantly corrupted. An oily mass layered on the surface. It bubbled and it spread downstream right into the city of Nuln. And from its dark depths, strange shapes emerged, plague bearers and tallymen, gifts of the plague god to aid Tamurkhan. At this point in the book jumps around and it skips to the following day, where the battle is not going very well for Nuln because sickness is rampant. The plague bearers make fearsome foes, and Tamurkhan has finally made it to the defense line. The soldiers who man the artillery are sick and dying with the plague. This expression of Nurgle's glory pleases the Dark God, and Tamurkhan's last remnant, which is barely an army at this point, charges in. He knows that if he can claim victory still, he can still ascend to demonhood. He just kind of feels it in his bones. At this point, this is more of a religious moment than it is a purely tactical general one. But after the fight began, his body was falling apart. That ogre tyrant lord body that he had taken over was just decaying and decrepit. It had fought off magic and a griffin, and it was now fighting the champion that I talked about earlier of the people. And this fight between him and the champion is pretty darn epic, but in the end, Tamurkhan overpowers him. Leaning in, Tamurkhan's bones begin to crack and ache, and he gets all gross, and he's about to do his body-snatching trick where the maggot jumps out and leeches into the other guy's chest. The words that he says right before he does this is he acknowledges, like, this is the last jump I'll ever have to take, because once I do this and claim victory, I will have arrived and Nurgle will bless me. When the slug that was Tamurkhan leapt from the rotting ogre body and came at the champion, whose name is Theodore Bruckner, the amulet that was given to him by his lady began to glow. Now, this amulet was a gift of the highest authority, like I said before. It's also a symbol of faith and power. And being repulsed by the darkness right before him, this amulet detonated in a holy light, destroying the foul creature that was Tamurkhan, the Maggot King, moments before his ascension into demonhood. Struck down when the Throne of Chaos was right before him. Now, it also killed the champion that was wearing it. We learn later on this is sort of a machination that was put in place by Elspeth von Draken, the one riding the Carmine Dragon that I said before, she'd been using magics to kind of manipulate the battle, and she kind of used the champion as bait. Get Tamurkhan to leap into him, and then detonate it right at the right point. So it's a little bit gray area morally to get to do this, but I understand why she did it. And in doing so, she likely saved the Empire, certainly saved Nuln, because if he went full demon at that point, all hell would have broken loose. Now the story concludes there that the remnant of the Chaos Forces are just shattered at this point. The demons fall back into the darkness, the cloud of dark magic that hovered around Tamurkhan's horde disappeared and dissipated, and Nuln was left to heal, repair, and survive. And as a final little segment, we learn that Sail the Faithless did actually survive his injury, and in fact he was the one writing this entire story. Thus concludes the tale of Tamurkhan, the Maggot King. Now, how does he get into Age of Sigmar? Well, frankly, his soul is saved by Nurgle, much like the Glotkin's souls were preserved at some point. Really, all those heroes who dedicate themselves to a Chaos God entirely seem to be preserved from the old world to Age of Sigmar, and Tamurkhan is no different because he is a playable faction in Age of Sigmar available through Forge World. There's not a ton of detail on how he made it through, but we know that Nurgle and the other gods preserve their champions for the right time, and I love the idea of this character being in the mortal realm. Someone asked a question in one of my earlier videos about can they jump into a Stormcast, which I think would be the coolest thing ever. I'm not quite sure about the answer on that, but it would be really cool to think about. And this has been a very exciting week. It's been really fun to revisit the old world, first of all. A lot of really detailed maps and information and characters, and what's cool about this book is that a lot of this information, it fits into the lore of the old world, but it's not dependent on it. Like, the events in this book are pretty isolated and self-contained, so I don't have to worry about like crossing the streams or getting characters mixed up, because they're kind of all made specifically for this story. Now, realistically, as someone who I've said before in other videos, that I love the idea of the path to glory, of someone being a champion dedicated to a particular god, and just riding that out to see how far it can go. And if you reach the end of that road, you ascend to true demonhood. And that's just the coolest character arc I think there is. And when we're looking at this character arc for Tamurkhan, it starts off real strong. He gets blessed by the Chaos Gods right away. He's given a clear vision and a mission. And from that moment, when he leaves the hag troll or whatever she is up on the far Chaos North, everything from that point goes terribly wrong. And it's hard to pin down exactly what happened. Truthfully, the biggest enemy of Tamurkhan is something that we all contend with, which is time. The time it took to go around the mountain range, the time it took to fight the Chaos Dwarves, the time it took to fight the Orcs and Goblins, all the various little fights that we had along the way. Not only did they take time, but they took resources. They chipped away at his forces bit by bit. And even though he was killed by really the plans and champions of Nuln, he was realistically killed by 1,000 paper cuts along basically the length of the entire empire and most of the old world that he traveled down. And what I love the fact is that these stories exist overlapping one another, meaning there wasn't like the time of Tamurkhan's horde. It's just this is one character on this arc, but you gotta remember there's also a character on the Khorne arc doing the exact same thing, and the Nurgle and the Slaanesh and the Tzeentch. Like, they're all just champions all over the place, all filled with minds of glory, who are going to go and take things down, and they just run out of steam, or things go wrong, or time is against them. Very mortal, trivial problems kind of weed out who is the true champion, who's the true person who's worthy of becoming a demon prince. And that is the drama and the story that I love about Path to Glory and love about this book, this system. In addition, as we've said before, this book is really about introducing the model range from Forge World. And in fact, if you go and look on the Forge World site, look at the Age of Sigmar stuff, honestly, most of the things on there come from this book, or at least they were part of the release that this book was also a part of. That includes monsters and beasts from a variety of factions, and so it really is an integral part of those releases. I will say certainly the Tamurkhan's Horde stuff does a great job of capturing the monsters. It's supposed to be used in tandem with the Maggot King of Nurgle models, which I think is a really good blend. I think Chaos Marauders and Chaos Warriors make a great addition to the models there on Forge World. In fact, I'd say they make a good bulk of the army, and then having the actual Tamurkhan model and then a few random other odds and ends addition is really the way to go if you want to theme this army. But then I look at others and I think, the Chaos Dwarf army that's up there, the Legion of Asgore, is solid in and of itself. It's very expensive to get into, but as far as a range of models, it is very self-sufficient and isolated. It doesn't need a whole lot added to it. So I thought that was pretty cool. You'd be amazed at the odds and ends they added in, like giant cave squigs or random lieutenants and leaders for orcs and goblins armies. Those little thematic elements you can add to your army to really make it draw out the theme in this story. All in all, I hope you enjoyed this story. It was a fun little detour from things in Age of Sigmar. Since it's kind of a low point right now, we're just kind of chilling, waiting for Orktober to be over. But I had a lot of fun going through this book, and I hope you had a lot of fun joining me. I thank you all so much for spending this much time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in next week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.